wanted to bring in some perennials, so plants that come back every year. And these perennials are long blooming perennials. So
Nice.
sometimes you get that seasonal, like candy tuft. I mean, it's beautiful in the spring, great early perennial, but it's going to stop and then
Yeah.
it's kind of done.
Most perennials are a lie. Not a small lie. Not the kind you forgive after one season. The kind that costs real money, real time, and real disappointment when you walk outside in August and find nothing but a yard full of green leaves doing absolutely nothing. The tag at the nursery said perennial. It came back. It bloomed. 3 weeks of color, maybe 4 if the weather was kind, and then it spent the next 5 months just sitting there, taking up space, offering nothing. And somehow, every spring, gardeners across this country walk back into that same nursery and buy that same plant again, because nobody told them there was a better way. There is a better way. 9 perennials exist that bloom from late spring all the way through the first killing frost. Not 3 weeks. Not 6 weeks. Months. Continuous, stacking, overlapping color from May until the season ends. Some of them are familiar names wearing a completely new identity. Some of them are so rare in American home gardens that most nursery workers have never once been asked for them by name.
These are all different varieties of scabiosa, which is the strangest name for a flower. When you're at the store, like at the garden center, it might be labeled pincushion, but these are all different ones. So these are from the set that's like the summer berry.
At least 5 of the plants on this list will stop people on the sidewalk in front of a yard. At least 3 of them, the average American gardener has never planted. Not because they are difficult. Not because they are expensive. Simply because nobody thought to mention them. And the plant at number 6 on this list is the one that changes everything. It is so uncommon in residential gardens across this country that experienced master gardeners, people who have been working with soil for decades, have described seeing it in full bloom for the first time with the same 3 words. Why so late? Why did nobody say something sooner? Why was this sitting in obscurity, while ordinary, forgettable perennials took up prime border space in yards from Maine to Oregon for the last 30 years? That question has an answer. And by the end of this video, it will not apply to this garden anymore. But before that plant is revealed, something needs to be said about what makes a perennial genuinely worth planting. Because the gardening industry has quietly lowered the bar so far that most people no longer even realize what they stopped expecting. A perennial that earns its ground does not disappear after one flush of flowers. It does not demand so much maintenance that it becomes a second job. It does not look spectacular in the nursery pot and exhausted by July. A real perennial carries color through the hardest months of the growing season, attracts life, feeds pollinators, and gives the garden a reason to exist every single week from the last frost of spring to the first frost of fall. Every plant on this list meets that standard. Not some of them. All 9. Hi viewers, here is a simple question before this list begins. Do you already have perennials growing in your yard right now, or are you starting completely from scratch this season? Drop it in the comments, because knowing where gardeners are starting from helps everyone watching this video get more from what comes next. Now, the first plant on this list is one that most American gardeners have seen and dramatically underestimated. It looks soft. It looks gentle. It looks like something that probably needs coddling. It does not need coddling. It needs one specific thing done to it once per season, and when that one thing happens at the right moment, it blooms from late spring through October with a consistency that makes every high-maintenance perennial in the border look embarrassing by comparison. That plant is next. Gura does not look like a workhorse. That is the first thing most gardeners get wrong about it. Standing in the nursery, it looks almost too delicate to function. Then wiry stems. Small flowers. A general appearance of something that probably needs constant attention and careful handling to survive a full season in the ground. Walk past it, and a season of extraordinary color gets left behind on that shelf. Gura, sold under the common name whirling butterflies, produces clouds of soft pink and white flowers that float above the foliage on stems so fine they move in the lightest wind. The effect is not stiff, not formal. It looks like something wild and intentional at the same time, which is exactly the quality that makes designers reach for it, and exactly the quality that makes it impossible to ignore once it hits full stride in a border. The bloom window is where this plant earns everything. From late May through the first hard frost. Not a flush and a rest and another flush. Continuous. Uninterrupted. A steady, rolling production of flowers that does not slow down in August heat the way almost everything else in the border does. Gura is a warm season bloomer, which means the months that exhaust other perennials are the months this plant performs at its absolute peak. Hardy in zones 5 through 9. The one secret that doubles its performance is simple. Cut it back by 1/3 in midsummer, right around the 4th of July in most U.S. climates, and the plant responds within 2 weeks with a flush of new growth so dense and loaded with buds that the first half of the season looks modest by comparison. Skip that cut, and it still performs. Make that cut, and it transforms. At dusk, something else happens in a yard with guava planted in it. Sphinx moths, the pollinators most gardeners never think to attract, find guava flowers specifically in the low light hours when almost every other pollinator has already settled for the night. A border with guava in it is a border that is still alive and working after the sun goes down. That is a quality almost nothing else on this list can claim. Plant it in full sun with sharp drainage. Give it room to arch and sway. Put it behind lower plants where those tall swaying stems can be appreciated from a distance. And do not crowd it because guava performs best when air moves freely around it. Southeast gardeners in zones 7 through 9, this plant was practically built for summer heat and humidity. It does not just survive those conditions. It uses them. And wait until the second plant is revealed, because what it does in the dead heat of August, when every other plant in a standard border has already given up and gone quiet, is the kind of performance that makes neighbors stop and ask questions. That plant is Coreopsis. But not the Coreopsis most American gardeners picture when they hear the name. Not the weedy yellow roadside version that spreads everywhere and looks ordinary by the end of June. Plant breeders have done something remarkable with this species over the past decade, and most of the gardening public is still buying the old version. Today's Coreopsis comes in soft pink, cranberry red, moonlight cream. Varieties like Sizzle and Spice and Uptick Cream and Red are showing up at better nurseries across the country right now, and they carry a refinement that the old yellow types never possessed. The flower size is larger. The color holds through heat without washing out or going pale. And the bloom window in these new varieties runs from late spring through October with one simple maintenance habit. Deadhead consistently. That is the entire secret. Remove the spent flowers before they set seed, and Coreopsis redirects every ounce of its energy back into bud production. A well-deadhead Coreopsis in late August, when the garden is supposed to be tired and finished, looks like it was just planted 2 weeks ago. That is not an exaggeration. That is what happens in yards across this country when this one simple habit is maintained. Hardy in zones 3 through 9. Coast-to-coast adaptability that almost no other perennial matches. In September, when monarch butterflies begin their migration south toward Mexico, they stop at Coreopsis specifically. A yard with a mass planting of these in late summer becomes a way station on one of the most extraordinary migrations on this planet. That is not a small thing. That is a garden that participates in something larger than itself.
In many gardens, there are lots and lots of different plants that create a tapestry of colour throughout the seasons. So we may have plants that begin to flower in spring, and spring is their only moment in time when they actually come to their flowering potential. And we also have flowers that just flower during a short period during the summer and again in the autumn.
Plant Coreopsis in the middle of a border where the full sweep of color can read from a distance, or mass it along a fence line in groups of 5 or more where the collective impact becomes something that stops traffic. But Plant 3 on this list is different from everything that has come before it. Plant 3 is native, nearly indestructible once established, and it produces a color so architecturally rare in the summer garden that landscape designers pay premium rates to build borders around it. Most homeowners have never once seen it growing in a residential yard. Veronicastrum virginicum. Culver's root. Say the name at a garden center, and watch the blank expression that follows. Most nursery workers cannot place it. Most gardening magazines have never dedicated a feature to it. And yet, in the gardens of the people who know it, it stands as the single most structurally commanding perennial in the entire border, and it does so from midsummer through September without asking for anything in return. The plant grows tall, 4 feet, sometimes 5 in rich soil, throwing up long tapering spires of tiny white and soft lavender flowers that rise above everything around them like candles lit at the back of the border. The visual effect is vertical in a way that most perennials cannot achieve. It adds height, structure, and a wild formality that makes even a simple planting scheme look deliberately designed. Hardy in zones 3 through 8. Once established, it requires almost no maintenance. No deadheading to keep it blooming. No staking in most conditions. No fussing with soil amendments after the first season. Plant it in average garden soil with reasonable moisture, give it full sun to light shade, and Culver's root does the rest entirely on its own. Swallowtail butterflies find it at peak bloom in a way that is almost theatrical. A mature clump in full flower in late July is covered with wings. Not 1 or 2 visitors. A continuous rotation of pollinators working those spires from morning through late afternoon, and the garden feels alive with movement in a way that lower, more compact plants simply cannot produce. The variety fascination produces slightly deeper lavender flowers, and a more upright habit than the straight species. In a mixed border, it belongs at the back where those tall spires can be seen rising above everything in front of it. In a rain garden or native planting, mass 3 or 5 together, and the collective height becomes genuinely dramatic. There is one thing to know about Culver's root before planting it. It takes time. The first season, it establishes roots and produces modest growth. The second season, it starts to show what it is capable of. By the third season, a well-placed clump of Veronicastrum is the most visually commanding thing in the entire border, and it will remain exactly that for decades without ever needing to be divided, relocated, or replaced. Patience is the price of admission. The return on that patience is extraordinary. And then, there is Plant 4. Plant 4 has a secret that most gardeners only discover after they have already lost it. Twice. Sometimes 3 times. They plant it in spring. It blooms magnificently through summer. Fall arrives, and they do what gardeners are supposed to do with perennials in October. They clean up the border. They cut everything back. They put the garden to bed. And in spring, penstemon does not return. Not because the winter was too cold. Not because the soil was wrong. Because of one single mistake made with a pair of pruning shears in October that guaranteed the plant could not survive what came next. Penstemon, called beer tongue, is native to North America. It evolved here across hundreds of generations on dry rocky slopes and open meadows from the Rocky Mountains to the eastern woodlands, and there are species and varieties adapted to nearly every single U.S. region. Zones 3 through 9. Desert southwest to cold northern borders. Humid southeast to dry mountain gardens. This plant belongs somewhere in almost every American yard. The tubular flowers come in vivid scarlet, rich purple, deep pink, and soft lavender, and from late May onward they function as a hummingbird beacon. Plant 3 or more together in a sunny, well-drained location and ruby-throated hummingbirds in the east and broad-tailed hummingbirds in the west will find the flowers before the hose is even coiled back up. But here is the secret that saves the plant. Do not cut it back in fall. Not in October. Not in November. Not even in early spring. Those old stems standing through winter are not eyesores. They are insulation. They protect the crown from the repeated freeze-thaw cycles that destroy perennial root systems in zones 4, 5, and 6, and cutting them away in autumn removes the one protection the plant has against the conditions that kill it. Leave them standing until late spring. Until new growth is already pushing from the base. Then and only then, remove the old stems. That single habit is the difference between a penstemon that returns for decades and one that disappears every March without explanation. Southwest gardeners, choose Penstemon strictus or Penstemon etonii for conditions where summer heat and low water are the primary challenges. Both varieties handle those conditions with the kind of ease that makes other perennials look fragile by comparison. And now Plant 5. Plant 5 looks so gentle, so impossibly refined sitting at the front of the nursery bench, that most gardeners walk past it assuming it must be complicated. Fussy. The kind of plant that requires specific soil amendments and careful attention and probably dies in the first hard winter anyway. It does not. Scabiosa. Pincushion flower. Tougher than it has any right to look, and it looks like something cut from a watercolor painting of an English meadow. The flowers are soft lavender blue, clean white, and deep burgundy red, each one a perfect domed cushion of tiny petals sitting on long slender stems that move in every passing breeze. The effect in a border is effortless. The feeling is wildflower meadow even in the most structured, formal planting scheme. And the bloom window, with consistent deadheading, runs from June through October in most U.S. gardens. Hardy in zones 3 through 7. Cold hardiness that genuinely surprises most gardeners given how delicate the plant appears. One mature, established Scabiosa plant can produce over 2,000 seeds in a single season. That number is not a warning. It is an invitation. Deadhead consistently if managing the spread matters, or let it go and allow the plant to naturalize across an area with a quality that looks entirely deliberate. Either approach produces something beautiful. For cutting gardens, Scabiosa belongs at the top of every list. Those long slender stems hold in a vase for days longer than most perennial cut flowers, and a mixed arrangement with Crocosmia and Gura built around Scabiosa stems looks like something from a professional florist. From June through late summer, painted lady butterflies and swallowtails find Scabiosa in full bloom and treat it as a landing pad. On a still August afternoon, a well-established clump is in almost constant motion with wings. That quality of life and movement in a garden is something that no garden ornament, no decorative pot, no hardscaping element can replicate. Pacific Northwest gardeners, Scabiosa reaches its absolute best performance in the cooler, moisture-growing conditions of that region. Planted in full sun with good drainage, and it runs from June through the first frost without a pause. And now, Plant 6. This is the plant that changes the conversation. This is the one that experienced gardeners describe with those 3 words. Why so late? Why did nobody say anything sooner? The plant that draws hummingbirds before the planting is even finished. The one with colors that did not exist in it 5 years ago. The one that peaks in August when everything else in the border is already winding toward its end. This is agastache. And it is about to become the most important plant in the garden. Agastache. Say it out loud. Agh Stashi. Most American gardeners have never used that word in a sentence. Most have never seen this plant in a residential yard. It grows in specialty nurseries, in the gardens of people who know things most gardeners are still finding out, and in the wild spaces of the Southwest where it evolved under blazing sun and dry rocky soil into something almost impossibly tough and impossibly beautiful at the same time. Commonly called hyssop. Sometimes called giant hyssop. Almost always underplanted when it is planted at all. The bloom window is midsummer through hard frost. When every other perennial on a standard list is winding down in August and September, agastache is accelerating. It does not slow in heat. It does not fade in late summer drought. It builds through the hottest months and peaks at exactly the moment the rest of the border goes quiet, which makes it the single most strategically valuable late-season perennial available to American gardeners right now. The new summer-long series changed this plant entirely. Vivid coral, deep magenta, soft peach, gentle lilac. Colors that did not exist in agastache 5 years ago now appear reliably in better nurseries across the country, and every single one of those colors draws pollinators the way nothing else in a late-season garden can match. Bumblebees, hummingbird moths, and hummingbirds, specifically, who find agastache with a speed that seems impossible. Planted on a Saturday morning. By Sunday afternoon, something with wings will have already located it. That is not poetic language. That is what happens in yards across this country every single summer, when this plant hits its bloom stride. The hummingbird activity around a mature agastache in August is so consistent and so concentrated that a single square foot of it outperforms almost every other pollinator plant in the garden. Hardy in zones 5 through 10 depending on the variety. In zones 5 and 6 where winters push its hardiness limit, many gardeners grow it as an annual in containers and collect a full season of extraordinary color without any concern about winter survival. The investment is modest. The return is months of color and wildlife activity that a standard annual cannot approach. One demand above everything else. Sharp drainage. Plant agastache in amended, gritty soil with excellent water movement, and it thrives with almost no attention. Plant it in heavy clay that holds moisture through the cold months, and it fails at the crown even inside its hardiness zone. The drainage is not optional. It is the entire foundation of this plant's success. Southwest and southern gardeners in zones 7 through 10, agastache was practically engineered for the conditions most other perennials treat as punishment. Intense heat, low rainfall, long dry summers. This plant does not just survive those conditions. It uses them to produce its best performance. Now Plant 7. Plant 7 offers something no other perennial on this list can claim. 2 completely separate, completely spectacular performances in a single growing season. A spring show so refined and unusual in its color that it reads beautifully from across the yard. And then, months later, an autumn display so dramatic that it rivals ornamental trees that cost 10 times as much. 1 plant. 2 seasons. Almost no one in this country has ever seen it growing in a residential yard. Amsonia. Blue Star. The spring performance opens in late April and May when star-shaped powder blue flowers appear above clean, willowy foliage. Not purple. Not violet. A true, clear powder blue that almost nothing else in the spring garden produces. A color so specific and so calm that it reads as something between sky and water on a still morning. The flowers finish. The foliage stays full and attractive through the entire summer without demanding anything. And then October arrives. The whole plant turns gold. Not a faded yellow. Not a tired end-of-season color. A brilliant, saturated golden yellow that holds through the entire fall season and glows in low afternoon light the way ornamental trees that cost hundreds of dollars are supposed to glow. 2 shows. 1 plant. Zones 3 through 9. Cut Amsonia back by 1/3 in late June to keep it compact and encourage that denser, more concentrated fall color display. Left unpruned, the plant tends to sprawl through the middle of the season, and the autumn performance loses some of its impact. That one cut in late June costs 5 minutes and earns months of better structure and a more spectacular finish. Southeast and Mid-Atlantic gardeners, Amsonia tabernamontana is native to that specific region and establishes faster, roots deeper, and performs more reliably than any imported variety. It belongs in those gardens in a way that goes beyond aesthetics. It is part of the ecosystem that evolved there. Native bees that overwinter in hollow stems use the dried stalks of Amsonia as nesting habitat through the cold months. Leave some standing after the season ends. The garden continues working long after the last flower closes, and that is exactly the kind of garden worth building. Plant 8 arrives now, And it is the most visually dramatic late summer perennial on this entire list. The fact that most American gardeners have never planted it is one of the great missed opportunities in U.S. home gardening. When it hits full bloom in July and August, there is nothing else in the summer garden that produces the same quality of heat, movement, and pure visual drama that this plant delivers. Crocosmia. When a mature stand of Crocosmia hits full bloom, the arching stems loaded with fiery orange-red flowers look like living flames moving through the border. That description is not an exaggeration. It is the most accurate way to describe what happens when this plant performs at its peak, and it is the reason people slow down and stop in front of yards where it grows. Hardy in zones 5 through 9. In zones 5 and 6, mulch the corms heavily in November, with a 4-inch layer of shredded leaves over the entire planting area. That insulation layer gives the plants exactly what they need to survive the freeze and thaw cycles of northern winters, and return strong every spring. Some varieties produce golden yellow, some a deep scarlet. But it is that vivid orange-red, the color of late afternoon sun hitting the edge of a fire, that makes Crocosmia the plant people ask about. Plant it in front of ornamental grasses, where those arching stems can be seen in full. Mass it in a cutting garden, where the stems hold beautifully in long-lasting arrangements. From July onward, hummingbirds find the tubular flowers with the same certainty they find agastache. Plant Crocosmia near a window that gets looked out of regularly, and what follows is a front row seat to something worth watching every single day through the height of summer. And then plant 9. The final plant on this list was saved for last deliberately. Not because it is the rarest. Not because it is the most unusual. Because once a gardener understands what it does across the full growing season, the way an entire border gets planned around it changes permanently. Rudbeckia. Not the old version. Not the disease-prone, leaf-spotting, ragged by July varieties that frustrated American gardeners for decades and gave this plant a reputation it no longer deserves. The variety called Henry Eilers changes everything people thought they knew about black-eyed Susans. The petals are quilled, rolled into narrow tubes that radiate outward from the dark center like rays of light from a point source. A flower form so unexpected and so refined that most people who see it for the first time do not immediately recognize it as a Rudbeckia at all. The golden yellow holds through summer heat without fading or washing out. The dark chocolate center stays clean and deep from the first open flower through the last bloom of October. The disease resistance in these new varieties is not a minor improvement over the old types. It is a complete transformation. The leaf spot problems that made late summer Rudbeckia look ragged and exhausted are gone. The foliage stays clean. The plant stays presentable. And the bloom window, from late June through the first hard frost, is one of the longest of any perennial available to American gardeners right now. Hardy in zones 3 through 9. In September and October, as monarch butterflies move south on one of the most extraordinary migrations on this planet, they stop at Rudbeckia specifically. A yard full of Henry Eilers in late summer becomes a way station, a place where something remarkable pauses on its way to somewhere else, and the garden becomes part of something much larger than itself. Mass it along a fence line in groups of 7 or more, and the collective impact in late summer is something that reads from the end of the street. Pair it with the deep violet of perennial salvia or the orange flame of Crocosmia, and the color contrast stops people mid-step. This is the plant that closes the season with the same energy it opened with. The plant that looks like it still has everything to give right up until the frost takes it. The plant that earns its ground not for 3 weeks, not for 6 weeks, but from late June through the last day the garden can hold on. 9 plants. 9 long-blooming, pollinator-feeding, season-spanning perennials that solve the problem most gardeners have been managing in their heads for years without ever knowing there was a real answer to it. A garden built around these 9 plants does not go quiet in July. It does not leave empty space where color is supposed to be. It runs from late spring through killing frost with something working, something blooming, something drawing wings and movement and life into the yard on every single day of the growing season. That is not an expensive disappointment. That is a garden. Now here is the question that belongs in the comments right now. Which one of these 9 plants is already growing in the yard, and which one is being added this season? Drop it below, because the answers from gardeners across different zones help everyone watching this video know what performs in conditions like theirs. And before leaving, there is one more thing. The next video on this channel covers something that most gardeners will not read about in any mainstream gardening publication this year. There are 7 native perennials that are disappearing from American home gardens at an alarming rate. Plants that supported the food chain of this country's wildlife for thousands of years. Plants that are now so underplanted that entire pollinator species are shifting their migration patterns in response. One of those 7 plants produces a fall color display so unexpected and so dramatic that landscape designers are quietly starting to build entire garden plans around it. That video goes live soon. Subscribe now so it lands in the feed the moment it does, because the gardeners who see it first are the ones who get to the nursery before those plants sell out.